We had to wait an extra week, but we got the latest episode death battle, Hulk vs. Godzilla. This is an episode that seemingly had a lot of people heated. This is one that's been on the docket, I guess, for a very long time. Way back in season 2, I think it was, Ben had a poll on Twitter as to what episodes should they do with the Hulk. Hulk vs. Godzilla, Hulk vs. Doomsday, or Hulk vs. Broly. Because of the recent release of Batman v Superman, Doomsday kind of won out at that one, and then eventually got around to doing Broly, and now they're getting around to the final one, which was confirmed via the Kickstarter. This was one of the stretch goal matchups. Though it also featured in the Tournament of Champions. Yeah, it featured in week 7 of the Tournament of Champions, and it came third in that week. It came out above Ellie vs. Clementine, but below Spike vs. Revy, and the winner of that week, Palpatine vs. Xehanort. So what do I think of this matchup? There's kind of two matchups that are happening, which is kind of the one that you think of when you the very surface level thought of like Hulk versus Godzilla, and then the actual fight that people talk about with the debate. And I'm gonna be real, I don't like either of them. Because on a surface level, you have Hulk, the strong guy from Marvel, versus Godzilla, the big lizard that crushes buildings. And that's only fun from one direction, which is Hulk fighting Godzilla, because, it's fun to watch Hulk fight a big thing. But not really from the perspective of Godzilla, because it's just a little guy slapping you about, and you're just a giant fucking thing, and you're essentially trying to swat a fly. Like, that's not that engaging, to me at least. And then when you get to the higher level stuff, which we'll get into later, especially Godzilla stops being the character that we think of when we think of Godzilla. It's absurd, like, what we end up with is so far from what I consider Godzilla. But, yeah, whatever. What do I think of the episode, though? It's alright, I guess. There's some cool stuff, but again, just the kind of vibe of the matchup for me, it didn't help. Like, there's some cool stuff that happens, especially at the very end of the episode, that I very much appreciate. But overall, they definitely didn't do it for me. Like, the last couple haven't really been for me, it feels. Though, the next one will change that, but we'll get there when we get there. So let's talk about this episode first, starting with the Hulk. So one thing this did that is quite neat is the start of both the analyses had a quote about the character. The one for Hulk is, "The Hulk is the personification of the enemy which lurks under the surface of us all. We have to control that enemy within ourselves, or we can't control the conduct of the world," which was said by Bill Bixby, or at least the quote is attributed to him, who was the actor that portrayed Dr. David Bruce Banner in the Incredible Hulk live-action TV series from 70s to 80s, which, was one of the earliest, popular, superhero products. Very cool, I like that. So since this is the third time that we've gone over Hulk, there's a lot of stuff they kind of assume, the gist about stuff, and even some of the more, lesser known, but still pretty big stuff about Hulk, which is that there's different versions of the Hulk, like the Devil Hulk, like Joe Fixit, like Savage Hulk, like Professor Hulk, stuff like that. It's definitely just standard, not a ton new until closer to the end when they start to change the topic. The main new thing that they brought up, and it's kind of weird, is that he can apparently reach into the space between panels, or gutter space, of comic books, which is kind of weird. It happened in a Gwenpool comic, but I do think the argument that She-Hulk does this all the time. So maybe it's just a byproduct of gamma radiation, and Hulk has a small amount of that ability. He just doesn't focus on it like She-Hulk does, which I think is reasonable thoughts on that. But again, that was a Gwenpool comic, so it's hard to argue. But if you pause that, fun fact, the dialogue that the Gwens are saying is not from that comic. It's original stuff for this episode, because, Gwenpool is a very meta-narrative character. And then it ends more or less where we expect, which is you talk about his hell travels and how gamma radiation is hell energy. But one thing that it changes, which will be important later, is they focus a little bit more on the man behind the monster, Bruce Banner, and how he is one of the smartest people in the Marvel Universe. The ones that they place him behind. At least according to Norman Osborn, he claims he's the fourth smartest, and Death Battle here essentially assumes that the smarter ones are Reed Richards, Doctor Doom, and Iron Man Tony Stark. Though there's definitely others that would fit that, like Hank Pym, and I don't know, there's a ton of super geniuses, but Hank Pym is probably the big one that wasn't mentioned there. I mean, he gets to be called the Scientist Supreme. But yeah, a lot of the stuff that happened, I need to find out when the him piloting Hulk like a mech happened, because that's pretty weird. And also, he managed to build his own Ultimate Nullifier, which is ridiculous given what the Ultimate Nullifier can do. Apparently, the green door turning red essentially is just they cannot pass, but Hulk is built different, can just punch through it. But yeah, those are most of the new stuff. It was pretty much just a mild amount of reaching past the fourth wall, and a little bit more focus on Bruce Banner as opposed to just Hulk being big and smashing things. There's some neat stuff, but you know, it's Hulk. We've been here twice before, and though we were only there once, we have seen Godzilla before. So the quote for Godzilla at the start of his is, "Godzilla is the son of the atomic bomb. He is a nightmare created out of the darkness of the human soul. He is the sacred beast of the apocalypse." This quote is attributed to Tomoyuki Tanaka, who was the producer for many Godzilla movies, including the original Godzilla. So, should know what he's talking about. We've seen Godzilla before once in the show, but that was also in season 2, probably over a decade ago at this point. In an episode that I thoroughly enjoy, Godzilla vs. Gamera, super fun. Yeah, one thing, seemingly in recent episodes, but definitely here, it feels like they kind of have to, maybe it's just due to how they do the previews, but it feels like they do rush through a lot of the early stuff to and then backload a lot of like the nonsense mega feats, but the front loading of just like, here they are, here's what they can do. It just feels different from some earlier episodes where it was clearly they were just like telling the story of a character through the breakdown. And maybe it's just because they've gotten into characters where like either they just have a lot more history or they have a lot more stuff to explain because of how their abilities work. There's some fun stuff. They show a bunch of varying Godzillas, including Chibi Godzilla. That was fun. We get to see the part from Shinkalian where he fights Miku. Pretty wild. And they bring up just a good amount of them. They mentioned Shin, Hanna-Barbera. They do mention Zilla at one point, and that time he got busy. Which is like, that's kind of the side of Godzilla I like. I like whenever he's like a goofy superhero, or at least, I don't know. I like when he's a monster or a like hero. I kind of prefer that as opposed to where we end up at the end here, where he's like an extra-dimensional concept. Like that's not what I want from Godzilla. This doesn't feel like Godzilla anymore. Yeah, that's kind of what the last part. I've not watched Singular Point or any of the Godzilla animated movies or series or whatever. I've really only just seen, a variety of movies. I think I saw Godzilla vs. Mothra and Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla. I might have been Mechagodzilla 2. I don't think it was Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. Can't remember. And I've seen all the MonsterVerse ones, so the 2013 one, Godzilla vs. Kong, Godzilla King of the Monsters, Godzilla Cross Kong. Those are all fun. And, I've seen Shin Godzilla at -1. And all of them are good in their own way, except 2013. That one's kind of boring. The rest of them are good, though. I should probably check out, the Millennium ones, like the ones that lead to, Final Wars, because apparently that one's pretty sick. But yeah, the main one that they kind of end up at is the one from Singular Point, which is referred to as Godzilla Ultima, who I don't love the design of Godzilla Ultima. The mouth is too big, and they say he has a Oni smile, which I definitely agree with, but I think it doesn't look great. It's not what I want Goji to look like. I don't know, it just feels off that at the end of both the analysis, this fight, which is man who is strong fights large lizard who wrecks buildings, ends up at extra-dimensional force of evil versus immortal beast with the scientist that can figure it out. I was never a fan of this, and a lot of people weren't a fan of the debate either, it seems, but I think that's more just trying to figure out whether or not one of these, high dimensional bullshits is better than the other one is just kind of frustrating. And that's kind of the part where versus debating kind of gets a little annoying. You just argue about like conceptual bullshit that doesn't really make sense. But no, I'm gonna stop talking about that. Let's get into the fight. And first we talk about the voices. So in this episode, Godzilla is voiced by himself. At least that's how he's credited, which is at least a fun thing. They do just use the classic Goji roar, which is probably public domain at this point. But on the other hand, there's two other voices. One is a news reporter, flies around a helicopter recording it a couple times throughout the episode. Unfortunately, they get wrecked by Ultima, and they are voiced by Dawn M. Bennett, who has been on Death Battle a few times before. In Season 3, they were the voice of Jean in Dante vs. Bayonetta and its subsequent DBX. And in Season 4, they were the voice of Naruto in Ichigo vs. Naruto. She does a good job as a thing. She's also notably done a bunch of other stuff. Is the voice of Kiel in Dragon Ball, as well as Aegis in the Persona 3 remake, Persona 3 Reload, and a whole bunch of other stuff. But those two are probably the biggest ones. The other fighter, on the other hand, is voiced by Blythe Mellon, who this is his second time on Death Battle, where back in Season 9, he was the voice of Heracles in Hercules vs. Sun Wukong. He's only credited as Hulk. I'm going to assume that he's also the voice of Bruce Banner, and he does a good job for both of them. The only thing he's credited as here on the wiki is that he is the voice actor for Thor in Marvel Snap. So he does the very quick voice line for when you play that card, which is fun, as well as the Thing. I think he does a good job, especially as Banner in this episode. Hulk doesn't actually have a ton to say. And he does have like a line that's like a little clunky, especially compared to just the previous episodes, because it feels like they have used all of the like cool lines for Hulk, and they're like, we don't want to repeat them, so we have to think of a new one. Because like we'll get to it in a second, but like in Hulk versus Doomsday, he says like, you break buildings good, but Hulk breaks worlds. That's a good one. Hulk gets a good couple ones in Hulk vs. Broly. I think that one's really good, but he has like, Hulk not just incredible, Hulk immortal, that he's the devil, stuff like that. But in this one, he has the kind of awkward one. You think you're strong, I scar the world. Like, you're really trying to get in the green scar kind of motif. It's a little awkward. Don't care for it. But yeah, it's fine. It's fine, whatever. The music for this episode is Madness of the Monster by Beowulf Media. This is definitely more score than music. It is good and it very much fits for the tone that this fight is going for. But again, it is just a score, not a song, I would say. Though you can very much hear the classic Godzilla theme throughout the entire thing. Overall, pretty good. It's not something I'm going to put in my playlist, though, because I would prefer to listen to the more song ones than the score ones. There are good score ones, but this is not a fun listen to. This is a dramatic tension building song. But now on to the fight, which was animated by Devil Artemis, David Fincher, and Luis Cruz. There's good animation in this. The weird part I have is that the models used definitely clash a lot. They, for Hulk, use his Marvel Rivals model, as well as the Rivals model for Bruce Banner, which is cool, but they have a very distinct art style, and it does clash a little bit with everything else, especially the various Godzillas, notably the Ultima one used at the end. The guy that made that was like, oh cool, thanks for using my model in your death battle, which that's cool. It does clash pretty heavily with everything going on though, I feel. With the fight, I think the first minute or so of the fight is kind of what I expected initially from Hulk vs. Godzilla, and it is pretty fun. Hulk's jumping a butt, he's swinging, he rips Godzilla's head off. Godzilla shoots a big laser out. He does the -1 breath, or at least it very much reminded me of it, where it's a very quick beam and then an explosion. Very cool. And then there's the part where he shoots the laser into the sky when Hulk's falling down. Very fun. All that stuff is pretty good, and that's what I expected. But yeah, so that first minute, good. The weirdness then starts when, the red mist comes out and we have to deal with, the Ultima stuff. And also, they do a time skip it's very strange and reads kind of off. I get the idea that they want to go for it. It just kind of feels strange. To me, the pacing of the episode feels awkward. Well, I think they're trying to do. It's very different fight from other episodes because it's kind of mostly not a fight, or at least the fight parts are not the parts that matter. Pretty much as soon as that happens, the Hulk's victory kind of was locked in from the start, especially because he was very much positioned as the hero of the animation. He is kind of more heroic than Godzilla tends to be, but still, it felt a little frustrating for anyone that was rooting Godzilla. That was kind of expected, to be fair. If you're gonna do a David versus Goliath match, it's not very fun when you're from Goliath's perspective, but it's real inspiring when you're from David's perspective. But yeah, I did like parts of the end sequence. I really enjoyed just Banner talking through everything that needed to happen. It was very cool, and how his experience with Gamma allowed him to understand how to defeat Godzilla. The actual killing blow I wasn't a huge fan of, just because he punches through the door into his realm. There's just kind of a scream, and then he turns into a big crystal. It wasn't great to me. Yeah, Hulk wins. I was definitely more on the side of Godzilla, but I'm not arguing against it, given, especially with the arguments given. It seemed pretty reasonable, especially what they say at the end, that Hulk came out the victor, because he didn't actually come out the victor. The winner was Bruce Banner, which I definitely very much enjoyed. I don't like whenever we end up with fights that are just this high-level thing that is fairly obscure and not what people think of when they think of the character, versus high-end obscure thing up from the other character that's not what you think of when you think of the other thing, ends up being the fight, is not the most fun. Compared to Kyle versus Simone from earlier this year, the high-end bullshit for them is not that obscure, and it is what you think of when you think of those characters. A little different. Again, I wasn't excited coming into this, and there's a lot of stuff, so I have more issues than most of this episode. I don't think it's bad, though. There's good stuff in it. Like I said, I do like the Banner stuff. And it is nice to see Goji again, even though he's not kind of what I want from Goji. Especially with recent episodes, they've been delving into dimensional scaling and such, and maybe it's just for the higher end ones, but it can get a little tiring whenever it isn't what you kind of are going into the fight for. Like I said, you're going into Simon versus Kyle for that. I definitely wasn't for this one, but maybe I'm just not reading it correctly. In terms of tier list, let's put it on the tier list. Again, not a huge fan, so it's kind of going down here. But I liked parts of it, so I'm gonna put it above Wily versus Tom, because I was more than whelmed by this episode. There was cool stuff, as opposed to that where I was perfectly yep, it's a fine episode. It's definitely not my favorite and not what I wanted. Next time, however, is what I wanted, which is
justice will be swift. Justice will be painful. It will be delicious.
A sound soul dwells within a sound mind and a sound body.
Ruby versus Maka. This is one that we've been waiting for forever. And this is episode 200. This is a milestone episode, and you have to give it to a matchup that fits that milestone. And Ruby versus Maka very much fulfills that. Notably, it was requested by Monty Ohm back in season 2 of Death Battle, whenever they were just getting involved with Rooster Teeth, and they were just talking about stuff between, Ben and Monty, and he was like, yo, you should do Ruby versus Maka, that'd be sick, but also hold off for a minute for Ruby to get more stuff to show off. If you want to do another one, do Tifa versus Yang, which is what happened. And then, tragically, Monty passed away, so this is a nice tribute to him, and the legacy of Death Battle would not exist without him. This was also another episode that was confirmed during the Kickstarter, so, we've been waiting for this for a while. This was originally slated, according to the Kickstarter, for Ash vs. Yugi. However, that has been pushed back, likely due to just trying to figure out how that one works. 2 girls with sides, how do they fight? That makes sense. The only difference is one of their sides is a guy, the other has a sight that is a gun. Whereas Ass vs. Yugi is trying to figure out, how do we make these game systems function in a physical battle? So that'll take a bit longer. And also, from the way people are discussing this is not a hard bit to figure out. At least given beats we've seen, Maka probably wins. But also, I like Ruby, I like Soul Eater, I want to see this episode. I'm very excited for it. And until then, I'll see you.